challenges that face ordinary people and the policy framework for that. And then in the afternoon, so the package will start with the Minister of Trade and I, looking at investment and trade initiatives. We've heard about the different things that have been put in place so far. A new bill has been passed by Parliament on the investment center. Some tax have been introduced in talk tax, phone tax. All these are trade initiatives, but what do they mean? We're addressing that. We'll move on later on to look at how that fits within the international trade regime. Then we'll come back to look at all the things that are very exciting that Basil knows about. The monetary policy, interest rates, inflation targeting, etc., etc. What do they actually mean for what is inside people's pocket? And that is when Fifi Kwete, the Minister of State in the President's Office, the Financial and Allied Institution, will be having a conversation with our comrade here, Jechi, about that. That will bring us to the end of today's discussion, and tomorrow morning the Economic Justice Network will come and try and digest all these conversations into a program of advocacy and conversation for the future. So with that, I'm happy to welcome you all to this meeting and introduce you to the moderator for this morning session, Jechi. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tete. And thank you all for coming. As you are, well, it's self-evident that we're starting quite late. All the same, we are grateful that we can all get together to discuss, especially for the fact that we are all, by and large, very regular, ordinary citizens, and it's not always very usual to get your ministers to come and exchange with you and debate with people who, non-entities like myself. So I think, in one sense, that's a good thing. The only thing I'd like to apologize for, maybe the TUC, just like the country, is also undergoing development, and development can be a very chaotic and noisy and loud process. So I think on account of the fact that we are starting late, our speakers will be confined, hopefully, to about 25 minutes each. Themselves are aware of the time constraint that we have. So without further ado, I'll call on our first speaker, our comrade and friend, in the context of the plight of ordinary working people.
In a very mysterious way, which does not enable all of our people to participate in that discussion. The economy is discussed in language which is not easily understood, and it is discussed as a very technical subject and so on. I think it's important to break the discussion about the economy down to what it actually is. And from where I come from, I believe that the economy is nothing more than, first of all, identifying the resources available to us as a people, and these resources bring it down from the level where it's normally discussed to what it actually is. And I think that if you're going to discuss the economy, we are basically engaging in an exercise of identifying what resources are available to us, how those resources are exploited, and who benefits from the exploitation of these resources. And I'll submit that if you're looking at the resources available to us, we are looking at everything, including the human beings in the society, the quality of the human beings, and so on. We are probably looking at the weather conditions, the geographical conditions in which we live, and how that may be exploited for our benefit or not exploited for our detriment, and so on. We are looking at the rivers that flow through the land called Ghana. We are looking at its mineral resources, gold, diamond, and so on. We are looking at the forest. We are looking at everything that is available to us as a people. We are looking at the airwaves and how we may exploit that also for the benefit of our people. Now, I think that even in discussing the economy, it is also important to look at our history, because our history has contributed to shaping the kinds of institutions that are available to us, that facilitate these discussions among us, and which also shape policy. So a reference to that history is also very, very important. You cannot discuss the economy without taking a look at the history. And if you're discussing the Ghanaian economy, one of the key things in our history which is important to look at is, for example, the transatlantic slave trade, and how the transatlantic slave trade has affected us as a people, has affected our thinking, and has affected the development of institutions for harnessing the resources available to us, for exploiting those resources for the benefit of our people. It may also be important, for example, to look at classical colonialism and the kind of impact it has made on us. One of the visible impacts of the era of classical colonialism is the railway system that we have in this country. And I'm sure that you've already heard what I'm going to say. I'm only repeating it for purposes of illustration. Many, many people have commented about the railway system in this country. You look at the railway network, where does it begin and where does it end? It either begins from a diamond-producing area or a gold-producing area or an area where we can cut timber or where we grow cocoa for export and ends up in the port. That clearly describes the orientation of the railway network, which is not substantially different from the orientation of the national economy. Can we continue forever to operate an economy, to develop an economy whose orientation is to provide the needs of outsiders, which has nothing to do really with generating the productive, with improving the productive capacity of our people and resolving their problems with access to kenke and fish, their problems with access to education, access to better housing, and so on? Can we forever continue to run this kind of economy? One of the things that we'd also have to look at would basically be our relations with the outside. How is our relations with the outside modeled? Is there fairness in the relations that we have developed with the outside world in terms of our trade and so on? These are also areas that we need to look at. Now, in looking at all of these areas, we'll come down to the basic question of what paradigm we are operating today. What is the paradigm? And what can that paradigm do in terms of our struggle to overcome poverty, to overcome ignorance, to overcome disease, to improve access to potable water, and so on? This paradigm of development, where is it leading us? Now, in discussing the paradigm of development, if you look at the contending political parties, it appears that there is no disagreement on what paradigm we should adopt. It appears that all the political parties in Ghana think that it is possible for us to copy the former colonial, powers and so on. They believe, and if you listen to public discussion, there is always reference to the United States of America, there is reference to Britain, there is reference to Canada, and more recently, a lot of reference to Malaysia, that if we would just copy the British model, everything will be fine with us and we'll be able to resolve the problems that confront us. In this kind of posturing, I think that very little attention is paid to history. And if we made reference to history, it should become very clear to us that the transatlantic slave trade, for example, was very, very important in making those countries reach the levels of development that they have reached. I mean, people from Africa and elsewhere were captured to work as beasts of burden for hundreds of years without pay. And in that situation, a lot of capital was accumulated and so on, and the very basis for the development of these so-called advanced countries was set. You can also not ignore classical colonialism, in which our resources were at the disposal of the colonizing authorities, and they exploited those resources for their own development and benefit and so on. Now, those who urge us to adopt these models may do us well if they were to explain to us how we can adopt those models of development without employing the methods that these so-called advanced countries employed. For example, one of the questions which would need to be answered is today, in 2013, whether it is possible for the Ghanaian people to go into other countries and capture people as slaves to work for us for hundreds of years without pay. And if that is not possible, how would we, even if we were to remain in that realm, be able to develop, to have capital accumulation, which would give us the leap that we require? It is also possible to pose the question how possible it is today, given all the circumstances we have, for countries like Ghana to colonize other people and so on. As far as I'm concerned, that option is not available to us. It is not possible for us today to capture others as slaves, to work for us as beasts of burden. It is not possible for us today to colonize other people, to use their resources to improve the living conditions of our people and so on. and therefore that option is closed. What option then is left is for us to harness our own resources, to exploit those resources, and to utilize those resources in a reasoned manner to be able to resolve the concrete problems which confront our people. Now, recently, the Minister for Finance made some disclosures which I think are very, very instructive. According to our Minister of Finance, national revenue, 70% of national revenue goes into the payment of salaries and wages for public sector workers, 70% of national revenue. Now, which means that only 30% is available to do the other things that are required, housing, all of that. 70%, according to him, goes into the payment of salaries, wages, and so on. Now, if you come to ask, how many workers do you have in the public sector? The answer is shocking. The public sector employs only about 600,000 workers. Now, Ghana has a population of about 24 to 25 million people. And 70% of our total national revenue goes into paying the salaries of only about 600,000 workers, less than a million. That raises major problems. Now, there are those who have suggested that the improvement in the conditions of work of public sector workers and so on is responsible for the economic problems that we do have, and that agitation for wage improvement and improvement in conditions of work and conditions of life is likely to cripple the national economy. I have a major difficulty with that, considering the fact that these public sector workers are actually mostly living beyond the real poverty line. These are people who are not able to pay their children's school fees. They are not able to afford, decent housing. They live in communities without potable water, even in the national capital, and so on. So if these conditions, their conditions of poverty and so on, are responsible for the huge economic problems that we have, arising out of low revenues and so on for government, then we have a very serious problem, because I do not think that these working people are living in conditions which are human, in conditions which are befitting, working people anywhere in the world. So I have a difficulty with this kind of analysis. Now, what are the concrete conditions of our people? And I've said elsewhere, and I intend to repeat it now, that many of our people are still living in the Stone Age. And there's no question about that. You travel only a few kilometers outside Accra, 5 to 10 kilometers outside Accra, and you find that our people are living in mud houses, roofed with thatch, without windows and without doors. Some of the people living in this community have never enjoyed electricity supply, and it is likely that they may never enjoy electricity supply throughout their lifetime. They are still grinding their vegetables, and grains on stone with stone. And they are still going about barefooted. They are still susceptible to snake bites and its dangerous consequences and so on. Their children still have to walk 14, 20 kilometers to and from school and so on. This is the reality of many of our people in our society. Now, how do we get out of this? Now, there's talk of revenue mobilization, and I understand that the government has set up a revenue mobilization task force and so on. Where does revenue come from? Revenue necessarily must come from engagement in productive activity. It must come from the exploitation of our resources, and so on. What are the figures that we do have? We know, for example, that if you take gold mining, the turnover of bushmeat trade in this country is far higher than the national revenue from gold mining. We are told, for example, that we get less than 5% of the total value of the gold we export into the economy. That raises major fundamental problems that I'm sure that you will come to discuss as we go along. Now, how come that all of a sudden we are not producing anything for ourselves? I've been told that I have 5 minutes. I think I have 3 now. that we are not producing anything for ourselves. You walk down the streets and handkerchiefs are imported, toothpicks are imported, catapults are imported, even traditional games like Owari and Dummy and so on are imported. Now, it is clear that any society which depends on the outside for the supply of virtually everything, including handkerchiefs and all of that, would not be able to generate the level of employment required to keep its people productive and required to keep its people in a position which enables them to feed themselves and to feed their dependents. So it's going to be very important in these discussions to look at how we can improve the productive capacity of our people and so on. Now, if you talk to governments and public servants and so on, they tend to evaluate the economy using some criteria. They talk, for example, about the gross domestic product, and only last year we were told that Ghana's gross domestic product was one of the fastest growing in the world. They talk about per capita income and all of those things. And for them, that is the assessment of the national economy. It has nothing to do with how many people are employed. It has nothing to do with how many people have access to health services. It has nothing to do with how many people are enjoying potable water. It has nothing to do with education and so on. Gross domestic product, per capita income and so on. In all of these discussions, I think it is important for us to go beyond these mere figures and to question how we arrive at these figures. Because these are statistical averages. And statistical averages have a tendency to hide a lot more than they reveal. Because if you talk about the gross domestic product, what does it mean? Theoretically, it is possible for one or two multinational corporations to come into this country, with some technology and some resources and produce so much that the statistical averages will change in terms of how much we've been able to produce in a year. What would that mean? Who benefits from that production is not something that we readily answer. It's the same with the per capita income. You can actually have 1% of the population earning so much, or their incomes, leapfrogging to the extent that the per capita income in 1 year may grow by a certain percentage. What does that really mean for our people? Would that mean that every Ghanaian has had the standard of living improving and so on? Finally, I'd like to submit that in the discussions of the economy and its impact on our people and so on, perhaps it is more relevant, if we began to look at the impact of policy and the impact of our practices on the real life of our people. And the real lives of our people can be found in the type of housing that they live in. It can be found in the efficiency of the public transport network. It can be found in questions about equity in the distribution of national wealth. It can be found in answering the question, who controls the means of production and the means of distribution. The real conditions of our people can be found in their real lifestyles. Are they able to feed themselves? Are they not able to feed themselves? And what are the things that hinder that? It also has to do with some policy initiatives and so on. For example, you travel around Ghana and you see these huge, massive concrete structures, such as you can see through the window. And you find that everything we use in the construction of these edifices and so on are imported. First of all, there's the clinker cement and the machinery and all of that. The design itself is such that after you have finished building these monstrous structures and so on, you need to air condition them. We don't produce air conditions. We have to buy the air conditions and so on. Our power generation is in crisis. We have to bring thermal machines and so on and so on. Is it not just possible for us to have another housing policy which focuses attention on using indigenous material to improve existing housing? Is it not possible to develop a technology which improves the traditional mud houses that we have and so on, which is more friendly to the environment, which would not also entail the use of massive foreign exchange, in bringing in the materials that are available? Is it possible, for example, to look at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, some of the work they have done about naturally occurring cement in Otepolu and so on for the construction industry? Is it possible to look at what to do with the cocoa huts, which is said to be highly cementatious, and so on? All of these are things that we can look at in order to improve the conditions of life of our people. Unfortunately, many people in our society are living lives that are not worthy of anything. Many people in our communities and so on are living lives which belie the resources, the abundant resources that we have in this country. And I think it's important for us to constantly engage in this discussion and debate in order to arrive at conclusions which would enable us to liberate the vast majority of our people from ignorance, from poverty, and all of that. Ignorance has become a major problem in our society. I mean, you go to the rural communities and so on, even in some urban communities,